Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Trisha Mulligan, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost here at Iona. On behalf of President Carey, the faculty and staff, and our students at Iona, welcome. I'm very excited to welcome you to the first lecture in our inaugural Gabelli Center for Teaching and Learning Presidential Speaker Series entitled AI, Minds, Machines, Meaning, Teaching, Learning, and Thinking. The Presidential Speaker Series is designed to foster conversation at Iona and the wider community on the nature and value of education. These talks are a forum for discussion, inquiry, and experiment, and audience participation is a key factor in bringing out the insights that will move us all together forward. We are so grateful to our colleagues in the Iona community, particularly IT, facilities, and Marcom, who have made this event possible, and to all of you here in attendance. I would be remiss not to offer a special word of thanks to the generosity of Mark Gabelli and the EMG Madonna Foundation. I have to make a confession. When my college-age children learned that I was going to be involved with our faculty, librarians, and students on AI initiatives, the response was, "But Mom, you can barely use your iPhone." I promise you, I can't actually use my iPhone, and I do know something about teaching and learning. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to take a moment to situate the importance of this lecture series and the role and impact of AI for us here. Although generative AI is not entirely new, it is to most of us in higher education. And we've been grappling with the rapidly emerging and significant new developments in AI, including, of course, the advent of ChatGPT and the many others that are popping up and sometimes disappearing seemingly each day. AI applications, tools, and use could pose some potential existential challenges to university education and possibly to other areas as we know it and have delivered it. This change has required our institution to collaborate across the faculty with librarians, with student support experts, and with student experts, and so many others. At Iona, we have quickly ascertained the need to provide a mechanism to facilitate understanding of the basics of AI, to engage our entire community in discussions of what AI means for knowledge and teaching and learning, and to create practical opportunities to learn and experiment with AI. Students will no longer view faculty as the only conveyors of content knowledge, if indeed they ever did, and so AI requires us to review, revise, and pivot in how we use technology, pedagogy, and the classroom. Moreover, students, and us, will be in a position to have to learn and be able to utilize AI to complete tasks in our professional lives and adapt the skills necessary to use it effectively. So a new vocabulary including prompt engineering, building, training, and utilizing machine learning models, among others. We are in a very unique moment and a very unique situation to learn in real-time skills that we need to be simultaneously teaching to ensure our students are learning. It's actually pretty awesome and also mildly terrifying. As President Carey has referenced many times, generative AI in education and learning, as well as in professional spaces, is without a doubt going to impact the way that we teach, we learn, we engage, and we work. Teaching and learning is at the heart of what we do here at Iona each day. And Iona Education encourages students to engage with big questions rooted in the liberal arts. Through engagement with big questions, students will demonstrate knowledge of the meaning and complexities of the human experience, what it means to have purpose, what it means to live a good life, to be informed and responsible citizens in this election era, and to seek peace and justice. The context in which we do that and the questions we and our students must consider is changing. This is not entirely new. But as President Carey has also noted, the emergence of generative AI will qualitatively alter the way we and our students will ask questions and define knowledge and learning. Fortunately, we have the tools and the critical thinking skills to meet these challenges, and events like these, engaging reputable experts to help us highlight the opportunities of generative AI in fields such as business. We will continue to examine and consciously define the ethical parameters and principles about when and how to utilize generative AI. And as we are doing with the Gabelli Center for Teaching and Learning, our newly confirmed inaugural presidential and provost fellows, this speaker series and other events and venues will engage with our colleagues to discern and address consequences that might emerge from the widespread adoption of generative AI in healthcare, in business, in government, and in education. These might include a growing digital divide, commodification of technology and access to that technology, economic and displacement, and fear. But there's a silver lining. With disruption comes innovation. Ostensibly, this means we throw out what's old and replace it with something new. But I would argue that in the case of AI and teaching and learning, innovation may actually be more accurately understood as rediscovering and embracing what is so very exciting about knowledge, and that's not new. What will be different is having a partner, perhaps to take up some of the slack of more mundane tasks or to serve as a co-pilot, pun intended, to make better what we do. And that is what we are, and that will be what we're doing at Iona, to reach new heights as an institute of excellence. One where we take risks, embrace our identity, embrace our mission, and where we challenge ourselves and grow from it. This is our new normal, and we need to pivot to ask not only what, but why. That is our greatest contribution and strength. And while we embrace the new, the different, we must do so intentionally. And so with that context, I'm very pleased to introduce this evening our speaker, Jeff Saviano. Jeff is an Iona alum, class of 1989, who earned his degree in accounting. I think John had something to do with getting here tonight. So welcome back, Jeff. As Jeff progressed and grew in his career, as you can see some of the highlights on the screen, Jeff developed other areas of expertise as he grew his career, culminating in his prominence now as a thought leader on AI and ethics in the business world. In addition to his Iona bachelor's degree, Jeff earned a JD from Syracuse University College of Law and an LLM in taxation from Boston University School of Law. Jeff is based in Cambridge, Mass, and is an associate with the Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University, where he studies AI ethics for corporate boards and the C-suite. Jeff is the EY lead, Ernst & Young lead, for the EY-MIT research collaboration, an MIT Computer Science Senior Fellow, and Socio-Technical Systems Research Center affiliate. He is a partner also with EY Consulting and a member of EY's Emerging Technology Strategy and Governance practice. Jeff is also an advisor for the U.S. Naval War College for the Ethics in Emerging Technology program. He's been a senior fellow at New America, a member of the U.S. Department of Commerce Trade Finance Advisory Council, an EY Global Tax and Law Innovation Leader. And apparently in his free time, Jeff is the host of the Better Innovation podcast, featuring interviews with technology and innovation thought leaders, and also serves on the Lapenta School of Business Dean's Advisory Board. Giving his remarks entitled, Winning the AI Race, Where Strategy Meets Governance and Ethical Intelligence, please welcome Jeff Saviano.
Doing the right thing. There's a unique field of AI ethics. AI brings out ethical issues. And I think it's important that we understand what those issues are. And responsibility, I feel responsibility as a member of this community. I feel responsibility to not just to talk about it, but to use it in practice. We are all, look around the room, we are all citizen developers of this technology. And that's what's so different about this AI from other past AI. Before this generative AI craze, and sometimes we refer to anything artificial intelligence that happened before generative AI, sometimes we call that traditional AI. I have a hard time, as the words come out of my mouth, to say what is traditional AI, but it kind of is. So we're going to go through all that tech. Okay, how does that sound? That sound good? All right, we're going to start with this. What can AI accomplish and what can it do? All right, I want to start with the path of ChatGPT. I could ask who's used it, but everybody has used it. What this shows is the path to get to 1 million users. 1 million's a lot of people, okay? 1 million users. Look at some of the examples. Took Dropbox 7 months, and Twitter, now called X, it took 2 years. Netflix, it took 3.5 years. It took ChatGPT 5 days. 5 days. And that's not because of an intense marketing campaign. There was no marketing. It was word of mouth because of the power of this technology. 5 days, like nothing we've ever seen before. Okay, 1 million users is cute, but that's not at scale. So look at this. What about, oh, my clicker seems to playing tricks on me. There we go. We need some help in the back. We got it. Okay, so that's not at scale, though, but 100 million users. Okay, now we're talking 100 million users. Uber, it took almost 6 years. Instagram, 2.5 years. TikTok, which I remember at the time thinking how fast this is growing in 9 months to reach 100 million people is amazing. And it took ChatGPT 2 months. There's power in this, and it's because of the exchange of, and as you're using these tools, it's like you're talking to a friend, and it's like they understand you and they understand the questions that you're asking. So this should tell you that we're onto something, that there's some real utility here in how fast this has grown. Okay. So let's do a little bit of a history lesson about, well, what is, before we talk about generative artificial intelligence, what is AI? And the roots go back to, let me start with a definition. And some refer to artificial intelligence as using machines to equate human intelligence. They'll define artificial intelligence by linking it to us and what we know as humans. And you do that by coding and by instituting specific software in order to make predictions. And a lot of the AI before generative AI was about making predictions. And so that's caused a lot of controversy, because there are some scholars that will scoff at any notion of how can a machine be even, how can you even talk about defining machine intelligence by comparing it to what we know? Because the essence of humanity, the emotions that we show, the judgment that we have, the ethics that we have, some would say you can't code any of that into machines, that there's an essence of humanity, what it means to be human. How could you possibly compare that to a machine? So some of the critics will say artificial intelligence is about narrow applications. You can code it to do a specific task, and it's narrow and it's small and it's defined, but stop talking about equating it to human intelligence, because it's kind of insulting to us people. So you've got different schools of thought. To trace it, so I'm going to go back. I won't spend a lot of time on the history, but 1943, two gentlemen, Warren McCulloch was a mathematician. Warren Pitts was a logician, not a magician. I keep saying that, and people say, oh, isn't that interesting? There was a magician involved here. A logician and a mathematician got together, and they created a computer model of the biological neuron. And that's, many people credit those two is how it started. Started in many will credit back to the early 1940s. And so looking at this particular page, the top left, there's pre-AI, we have rules-based automation. We're coding specific rules into software. We're specifically telling software what to do. We think of complex rules and systems, and actually having to put all of that into technology is hard. It's really hard. And so that was, we move over to what we refer to as predictive AI and machine learning. There was a big conference. I used to think it was, when I first learned about this, there was a conference at Dartmouth College in 1956. And it was where machine learning began. And I always used to think there must have been like 100 people at this conference. There were 5 people there. Okay, so it was a small field, but it was the advent of machine learning. And machine learning is creating prediction systems from data, using data to predict outcomes. So you don't have to specifically code the rules into technology anymore. You're going to learn from data. The data will predict, and you can learn patterns in data that can help you solve a problem. And so a few years later, in 1959, was many of the advent of machine learning, but it really had its roots a few years prior to that. And some of the examples of what we would use machine learning for in my tax days or my accounting and tax friends here, imagine you've got 10,000 lines of expenses you have to figure out. Is it deductible, or do I capitalize it, or is it not deductible? Machines are pretty good at that, pretty good at finding those patterns. But that's it. It's a prediction, and the data is structured. It's actually a pretty good application. So that's at a high level. That's machine learning. We move over to prescriptive AI, is that now we're using computer systems to actually do something about it, act on those predictions. In my example, it could be take that data and stick it on a tax return someplace. And so we're seeing this migration, and we're going to spend most of our time tonight talking about generative AI. What's so exciting about generative AI, it's the generate part of the word, is that you're actually creating stuff. You're creating, and that could be text, it could be video, it could be images, but you're creating something entirely new. And it's using a field of machine learning called deep learning, which is even more complicated simulation of how the human brain works and all of our neurons and the complexity of the brain. Some really smart computer software engineers figured out, well, that's a deeper form of machine learning that can solve different problems. And so generative AI, what's so impressive about it is that you're actually creating something. We're going to give a lot of examples of what's so impactful about it is the output and the artifacts that you take from that. Examples, if I'm a lawyer and lawyers are using to draft contracts. Nobody's drafting contracts from scratch anymore. These tools are a great starting point. They're creating something entirely new. And it is so powerful that it can be. I love this quote because sometimes it is. It's indistinguishable from magic. When you have an exchange with generative AI, it's like you're talking to a friend. And there's a lot of positive and opportunities from that and capabilities of that exchange with a generative AI tool. The conversation you're having seems so real, but there's risks with that too. There's risks of it may be a little too familiar. And, well, what's the information you're putting into the system? And is it confidential anymore? And should I be concerned about that? The answer is yes, and we'll talk about the reasons why. So where's the value? So why, and we're in a business school, and we're talking about generative AI and where these opportunities are. And so this is a simple chart. The y-axis is just value from low to high, and the x-axis is disruption. And in the dozens and hundreds of companies that we've talked to and we're working with, we're seeing patterns. There's patterns that have emerged, and one of the patterns is this migration from starting at number 1 and progressing to 2 and ultimately to 3. A lot of companies are starting with, well, these operational efficiencies. Before I expose this powerful technology to my customers, I want to get it right in the family first. I'm going to use it within the organization. Process efficiencies, we're going to cut costs, maybe even workforce will be adjusted, but we're going to use it for our purpose first. You're a marketing manager and you've got to issue 20 internal communications in the next 3 days. You want to get one out today, all you want to do is go to lunch with your friends, and it's in a half an hour, you've got to draft it, and these tools are a great place to start. And so companies are starting here. They're starting at this internal stuff, and they're finding efficiencies because that step 2 is hard. It's hard. As you expose this to your customers, you create new risks from that. And we'll go through what some of those risks are. To the ultimate and expanding, and what we get really excited about is number 3 of entirely new business opportunities. And you as business, many of you as business students and faculty here, but the opportunities to actually create new business and new business models because you didn't have this capability before. So that's also been exciting. And so one of the questions that I often get is, well, where are we in this evolution of generative AI? We've been experiencing the hype, and so where are we, and where our businesses. And I love this quote because I think this is exactly where we are. Winston Churchill was not thinking about AI when he said this, but he did say this, and I think we are. I think we are at the end of the beginning. We're at the end of the beginning. Well, what does that mean? We've studied emerging technology, and we've studied the trajectory of how does it advance. And there's a common misconception that many people believe that emerging, the most advanced technologies advance like a hockey stick. For any of my hockey players, I got lacrosse players, it doesn't quite work that way, but a hockey stick of that slow and steady growth of it's ratable, it's even, and it's steady, and it's consistent. And many people believe, well, isn't that what the growth will be like? And it's the furthest from the truth. When you look at it, there are patterns, and the patterns are chaotic, they're uneven, and they're disorderly. And this is an example. There's a few different aspects of how, in this case, Gartner, the company Gartner, has estimated, and in their research of, well, this is the path that you initially have this hype, and we have been living through a lot of hype around AI. You've got a hype that gets so hyped up that they call it, you'll ultimately reach what they call this peak of inflated expectations. We saw it with the internet, we saw it with blockchain, we'll see it with other emerging technologies where the expectations are too great. And so if you think of what happens at any peak and any inflation, is that for those of you who have kids or you remember your own, there's a sugar rush. What happens when you have a sugar rush? There's a crash. And there has been a crash from the other side of that hype and into what they call this trough of disillusionment, where you come off of the hype and then this is the reality check that maybe it can't do all of the things that people said it could do, or maybe the risks should be considered. If we were here 18 months ago, we would be talking about the metaverse. We're not really talking about that anymore. It was very inflated, and we're not talking about blockchain as much anymore. Those technologies, if we were graphing it, the trough of disillusionment for blockchain would be below the floor that we're standing on today. It went that low. I don't think AI will fall like that, but it will come. There will be a correction. What's exciting to me is what comes after that. What comes after the correction is they call the slope of enlightenment. I call it responsibility. It's responsible growth. We saw it with the internet. The internet, after the initial hype, and there was a crash. The crash was all of the startups, the dot-coms that were either fraudulent or just bad. They got weaned out, and the strong survived. We will see that again. Will it fall like blockchain did? I don't think so, but it will. It will fall. But what comes after will be responsibility. Okay, one other way that we try to answer this question of when, is we look at other innovations throughout history and what can we learn. I love this quote that history may not repeat itself, but it's rhyming, and the rhyming of what do we learn from other technologies that have advanced, and what was that path like. And so this will show the path to scale. Remember the scale question of AI for the 100 million users? Of reaching scale where you've got a preponderance of a community is using it. For automobiles and the television, it took like 40 years to reach scale. With the internet and cell phones, it took like 15 years to reach that scale. It won't take that long. Technology is developing faster. We've got greater access to data. The technology is more powerful. The community is frankly better at doing it faster. So it will be truncated. It has to be truncated, especially some of the estimates of the CAGR, or the compound annual growth, could be close to 40%. And so that will double. The markets will double every 4 or 5 years or so. So it will happen fast. Okay, so that's a little bit about capabilities. That's a little bit about opportunities from it. Then we have to talk about these risks. We've got to talk about some of the risks associated with this technology. And I want to start here because, and as a word of caution, there's all of a sudden we're finding there's a ton of these surveys, and people will promote, you've got survey data on generative AI. And when you look behind the curtain, some of these surveys are like 11 people who live on the same block. And they all do things the same way. And like, you got to really look behind the curtain because it's not worth it. And it's like, it doesn't really tell you much. There's a lot of bad surveys out there. This is not one of them. This is a survey from Microsoft and LinkedIn. 31,000 people responded. Okay, this was the data came in just a few months ago. 31,000 people. We've been waiting for this, and we're pouring through the data. The data is tremendous, and the data is really telling us something. There's a ton of important points from it. I want you to take away 3 points from this particular data. And the first is that, and congratulations, you're all knowledge workers. You're well on your way to becoming a knowledge worker. And 75% of knowledge workers are using AI in their work today. 75%. There was another survey, it was a decent survey a year ago, that was 50%, half people. So I actually think that's low now. It's a few months old. I think it's got to be in the 80s. That, not surprising, people are using it. They're using it for a lot of good, positive purposes. Well, part of the issue when we talk about risk is look at this middle data point. Nearly 80%, 78% of users are bringing their own tools to work. So if you're a risk professional, if you have risk responsibilities, so just imagine that marketing manager who is using the generative AI tool. He's taking his phone, he's just using an AI tool, putting confidential company information into an open source AI model. Is you have just released confidential information to the world. And so there's lots of risk associated with this bring your own device, this BYOD, that bringing your own AI to work is a problem. It's a problem for this reason, is that companies will have leakage. You'll have leakage of that important intellectual property. So those two, and there's another data point I don't show here, but half of people who are using it aren't telling their bosses that they're using it. Their employers don't know. So if you're an organization, we talk to boards and we talk to C-suites and big companies. And I was with one company of 20,000 employees and said, okay, so you probably have 10,000 people who are using it and you don't know what they're doing. Like, how does that make you feel? Do you feel good about that? There's risk all over it. Okay, the last point, and this is the one it really blows me away. 53%. Look at this last one. 53% of people who use AI at work are worried. They're worried if their bosses knew, it would make using it on important work will make them look replaceable. This is like today's imposter syndrome. This is the new imposter syndrome. Just imagine that more than half of people at work who are using it are worried. Like, if I get found out, my boss is going to think, well, maybe there's another way of doing the work that you're doing. That's not healthy. There's a shoe that has to fall on how workers are using it. That's just one example. So this is actually a pretty good survey, and it helps us with the question on the right, where how do we achieve this benefits at scale? How do you get to really using it at scale within an organization? And it takes change management. They've been living through digital transformations for decades. In some respects, it's not so dissimilar. How do you pull your employees along? How do you upskill people? All incredibly important to organizations to achieve this scale. Okay, we're going to zip through a few of these. The way that we think of risk, and especially in this space, is we look across these 4 domains. There's risk in operations, there's risk in how we govern or how we use it, and then the algorithmic models themselves, there's risk, and then from a strategy standpoint, we have risks. And I promise we won't go through all of these, but some of the risks are risks that companies have been experiencing. They've been experiencing data security risks for a long time, and data privacy risks of how do we ensure that the data we have on our customers or our employees, we're not leaking it to the world inappropriately. Data risks are huge. Change management is difficult. access management. How do you determine who gets to use it, and how do you give them a safe place to experiment with it? So these from an operational standpoint, we're just about a year into this, we're seeing a glimpse of, well, what are these risks from, and how is it really impacting operations? From a governance standpoint, I love the one in the middle. The wording is a little awkward. Proprietary obfuscation. Heck does that mean? What that means is that some companies are purposefully masking what the algorithms do. They don't want you to know. They don't want you to be able to explain how the algorithms work for fear of releasing some proprietary information. Is that good for the world? Is that good for the planet? How do we feel about the ethics around that, about not being able to explain how these tools are being used? But frankly, the one that we get really concerned about is around accountability. And there's some examples of, there's a story of Air Canada. Air Canada had a chatbot for, of all things, their bereavement policy. If you have to catch a flight, and if a horrible situation, and if you need to access their bereavement policy, the chatbot made a mistake to a lot of people, and they filed a class action. And the lawyer for Air Canada argued to the judge, said, well, it wasn't my client's fault, it was the AI's fault. And the judge, give the judge credit, said, want to run that by me again? Didn't the company develop it? And so should have got sanctions for that, but didn't, and the company lost the suit. But it's the issue around accountability. Think of it with autonomous vehicles that are advancing and advancing. If you have an autonomous vehicle, should you have the right to program into the car what happens in the unfortunate situation where you come to a fork in the road, and if in an instant, the machine will decide to go left and save the driver, or go right and save the family? Should you have the ability to program that into your car? Should you program the AI? Are we ready for that as a society? Do we want that as a society? If there's an accident, who's at fault? Is it the AI developer? Is it the driver? Is it the programmer? Is it the driver who is reading the New York Times instead of driving? Who's at fault? We have not worked through those issues yet as a society. So we've got governance risks around who is accountable here. Some of the model risk and some of this model drift and spoofing. There's risk of bad actors who will find your data, manipulate your data, knowing that the data will drive an AI system. We do some work with the Department of Defense. They told me of a risk I had never heard of, where everybody relies on open source software. Many cases, open source software is governed by like 2 people in a basement. It's not professional, it's not huge teams, it's not robust, and that technology makes its way into many companies' tech stacks. So what's happening is there's been some examples of bad actors approach those developers and say, you're kind of getting long in the tooth. Maybe it's time that we take over this technology and we advance it. And they take it, and all of a sudden they've got access to technology that open source software is being used by many, and we're finding that there have been some attacks that way. So we're really concerned about many of these risks. From a strategy standpoint, think of from an organization strategy, partnership dependencies, that works both ways. Many companies will say, like, we don't know what to do, we need help from an outside party. Okay, you could be over-dependent. Some companies aren't dependent enough and they're trying to do too much on their own. Getting that right. Who are your partners? Who can you rely upon? It's complicated. How do you find where you really need to be dependent and where you need to develop those skills on your own? Okay, so together we have a set of important risks that are unique to AI systems. And so why do we care? I love this quote. Steve Wozniak, who is the co-founder of Apple, he gets worried about like existential risks. there's little risk, and then there's these risks of could this technology actually result in something existential and something that we see this in some of the work with the Department of Defense. They're concerned about autonomous weapon systems and some early prototypes where the human in the loop tried to turn it off and the machine said, well, wait a minute, no, I'm in charge here, not you. And so we have issues. We still have issues with are we protected against the most existential risks that may result here? I think Steve Wozniak said it very well. Another element of risk that's becoming an issue is around trade-offs. And when we think of risk, that oftentimes, and especially here we show the risk associated with trying to act responsibly. And you'll hear notions of responsible AI. How can you build systems that are responsible for the world? And so you see these principles on either side, one around accountability, like my Air Canada example. We would all say, yeah, we need to know who. I had a boss who would always say, whose throat do I choke if something goes wrong? I never liked that, being her employee, but I get it now. If there's a problem, who's at fault? Who is it? Who? Not an army of people, but who? Who is that person who is at fault? So accountability, you need to access data, you need to be transparent to understand who would be accountable, and that could rub up against data privacy concerns and security. Or take reliability, think of the notion of reliability of having a high performing system. You want the highest performing. Many of you, if we ask the question, do you want low performing AI or do you want high performing AI? You're all going to say, give me the good stuff, right? The problem is that AI today, much of it is a black box. We don't know how it works. So what does that mean? It means that you can't explain it. The most powerful AI systems, if you ask it, if you query, and you want to know, if you have an AI system that's highly complex, if you're a bank and you're using it to determine if somebody should be approved for a loan or not. The US, we have truth in lending laws that say you need to tell people, like if they get denied for a loan, why. You can't do it with some of these systems. They're not explainable. And so which do you want? You're a leader, you're budding leaders in organizations. You're going to come out of this fine institution and you're going to be leading teams. Which do you want? Do you want the highest performing AI or do you want explainable AI? Because I don't think you can have it both ways. Someday in the future, I think we will, but today it's a problem. And it's a problem because some governments are demanding explainability, but many are not. And so tension. So much of this, and what makes this such a complex area, is that there's tension in these competing priorities like this. And these are just two examples. We talk about government and regulation. And I love this quote, The Economist, that another tension of you don't want to stifle innovation and you want to promote innovation, and governments have a responsibility to protect us, but I love, there's a term, regulatory parsimony. What that means is that, well, you want to do enough. You want to regulate enough to protect people, but not so much to stifle innovation. And that's hard. It's really hard to do. So I want to spend a minute on this question. I think we, and you here at this institution and the organizations that you are working for today or you will work for, who is responsible? Who do we feel like is responsible in the world to protect us from that Steve Wozniak, the existential, or from these risks? Who's responsible? Who are the guardians in the world responsible for protecting us from AI? And so one natural place is you may think it's the government. Well, we studied this. We got fascinated with the question. Got fascinated with this question of, well, does government want to regulate advanced technology? Everybody's jumping to this question of how will government have a heavy hand of regulation? Surely government will have a heavy regulatory approach to AI because of how powerful it is. Let me give you some examples. 1997, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order around e-commerce. Okay? In that executive order, he said something to the effect of, we have decided not to regulate e-commerce. We're going to leave it to industry to self-regulate. Okay, those of you with children here, teenagers, how do you feel about social media impacting your children? Do you feel that as a country, was that a good policy? We could debate. We could have an interesting debate. Was it the right thing for President Clinton to say, we're not going to regulate it and let social media giants take over and put this, some would say, addictive technology in our pockets? Or not? And President Clinton decided, and get a little jaded, the stock market was up like 400% in his presidency. So you look at it and say, well, maybe we don't want to regulate. You may think that that's one occasion, like he did that one time. He actually did it again the next year. The next year, he signed the Internet Tax Freedom Act and said, we're not going to let the states tax the internet because we want it to grow. You may think this is just happening in the United States. In China, they took a 7-year period. 7 years. You've heard of companies WeChat and Alipay, two of the most powerful fintech applications in the world. From the companies Alipay and WeChat were developed in China, competing with their national banks. And the government said, we're not going to touch it for 7 years. People lost their shirt. Families lost their life savings. Peer-to-peer lending networks were abound, and people lost a lot of money. Finally, the government had to step in. As a result of those 7 years, they are two of the most powerful fintech apps in the world. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. So if you're asking the question, if you're waiting for government to have a uniform, globally uniform, heavy-handed regulation, I don't think it'll ever happen. I'm a skeptic. There's way too much commercial value for that to happen. Will there be regulation? Of course, there already is. There will be some regulation. It will be helpful, and we need it, but I don't think it will be as extensive as many people are waiting for. So if not government, what about NGOs and civil society? You're following the saga of OpenAI. I was excited. OpenAI was a nonprofit. I was thrilled we'd have a nonprofit protecting us from these huge risks. And what happened? The company kind of blew up, and the board blew up, and the governance got really funky. And so there's so much value here for businesses that I don't think civil society can make a material impact. I'm a skeptic. I'm a bit of a skeptic there too. So what does all this mean? This means that there's a role for business, for the business community here at institutions like Iona and you as future business leaders, important. It's not just the big 5 developers. This is not a Microsoft, IBM, and OpenAI, and Google, Anthropic. Sure, there's important risks to manage there, but what about the retailer who's using it for marketing? What about the bank that's using it for loans? It's as important there too. And so the point of this is that the answer is that it's not government alone, and it's not civil. There's roles for all 3 parties here. But I think especially important for government that I don't think we're going to get what many people are waiting for, which is, let's just let government protect us. I don't think that that's the answer. Okay, well, despite that, there is some regulation, and just a snapshot of what is happening. And look around the world, 67 bills were enacted in those 2 years, 2022, 2023. It's rising this year again. By the end of this year, we're in 2024, the end of this year, in just a few months, 75% of the world's population will live in a jurisdiction governed by modern data privacy laws. It's pretty cool. What is that? That's GDPR in the EU, got extended to California and Canada and Brazil and the UAE and Australia and India. It's proliferating. 75% of the world will be covered. That's impressive. Some people think that there's a big AI bill in the EU that was enacted, the EU AI Act, that focuses on the highest risk AI. Some people think, well, maybe that AI Act will follow GDPR. It could, but I don't think it'll have as much of an impact. Well, what about the US? So what is happening here from a regulatory standpoint? I love, there was, can I go back, history again, I'm going to go way back to the 1930s. 1932, US Supreme Court case, New State Ice Company. Justice Brandeis, it was a dissenting opinion, my favorite dissenting opinion, Supreme Court case. He referred to the US states as laboratories of democracy. I love that. And he referred to it as something to the effect of some states, sometimes they have to, a courageous state needs to take a step. And so there's examples through our history of the US states being laboratories of democracy. And we're seeing that now, that there are dozens of states that are enacting legislation. They're enacting task forces. Colorado has a really impressive AI bill. New York City has enacted specific legislation. We're seeing it. We haven't really seen comprehensive US legislation. So when that happens, what do we see? We see the states filling the void, and that's what's happening here as well. Okay, so we're going to go, how are we doing on time? We're doing okay? Another hour and a half or so, Jim? Okay. You have no place to go. Right. Okay, ethics. We're going to talk about ethics. I always say we leave it to the end, but it sort of builds. We've got to talk about ethics. And as mentioned earlier, I've been spending some time this year with the Harvard community studying ethics, and I love this quote from the founder of the Ethics Center, that ethics of public life is too important to be left only to ethicists. What does that mean? That means that it's an important issue for us, for all of us. This is not an issue just for the philosophers, with due respect to the philosophers in the room here today. You're important too, but it's important for everybody. Ethics is important, and we're finding that, especially we spend a lot of time with corporate boards and with C-suite. The average age of a director is 67 years old, trying to understand AI. You understand, and this community will understand AI more so than many senior business leaders who didn't come up with that technology, didn't come up as digital natives. And so because of that, because they didn't come up, there's education that has to happen. There's education where they need to understand and appreciate what can this technology do. And so from an ethics perspective, one of the first places that we studied, and just to tell you another aside, another quick story, this was not about David Bowie, but another story. We were meeting with an ethicist at Harvard explaining the research we're about to embark on of AI ethics for business leaders and the business community. And remember, I'll never forget, he sort of turned to me and said, you don't have a chance of understanding how to answer the question, how can you influence business leaders to do the right thing and understand the complexity of AI ethics? You don't have a chance of achieving that until you appreciate what is influencing those leaders. Okay, like that sort of threw me. We took our research team, we took them offline for about 6 weeks and said, I want you to study this question. So we studied the question, who is influencing the business community today on matters of AI and responsibility? And we came up with these 5 categories. Some of them we've already talked about: societal guardians, NGOs, and regulators, and policymakers looking out for like all of society. Sure, people are looking out for and providing guardianship for society. Different from, we refer to the protectors of specific classes. And one of the areas that we're starting to learn a lot more about is unions. It may follow the longshore, the longshore strike that just happened. That was what was disputed across, and what was at issue was much of it was an AI. These are AI questions. They called it, they didn't refer to it that way. They refer to it as automation. It's AI. They're worried. What are they worried about? They're worried about a tough union boss is worried about their people. And they said, like, we don't want you to innovate. Actually, some of the words were frightening. We want you to stop innovating to protect the workers. We don't want any more automation. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. And so we're finding is that there's a group of protectors, and we hear this from companies, from leaders all the time, that unions are waking up saying, we want you to take action. What is your responsibility, an ethics issue, to upskill the people in the organization? I was meeting with a leader, a government leader, had about 8,000 people reporting to him. We talked about automation and AI and some of the benefits and stuff we're talking about today. And he sat back and he said, this is really great. I love it. I'm with you. I could see the value here. All of this is good, so long as not a single person loses their job. That's pretty good. I don't think that's universally felt. Talked to a lot of companies and they can't wait. A lot of private equity can't wait to slash and to burn and to burn those ships on the way out. And there's a lot of examples of that. What is the ethical responsibility that business leaders have to their people? Upskill. What responsibilities do government leaders have to institute new training programs for their people? We've faced this as society. We faced this in the Industrial Revolution. We've faced this before. Humans are an adaptable bunch. There's many new jobs that are coming out. In the legal field, there's new jobs of prompt engineers for how do you ask better questions of an AI system? And so we're finding is that for this analysis, that the other, we got really interested, I'll give you one more, is investors. Investors are waking up. Institutional investors, many of them, with examples of many who now have published statements saying, this is what we expect from you, company we're investing in. We expect this level of governance from you and how you're managing your AI programs. So the point of this is that I believe you've got to understand influence. We got crazy about influence, and I would urge you to think about that. In your organizations, think of it here of what is influencing people who are making decisions around AI. Okay, one of the things I'm most proud of around the work that we've done is actually designed a new framework for business leaders to help them with their AI decision making. And so we did in a pyramid and we worked from bottom to top. And this will come to life with some examples. The first two layers these are actions of things that we say companies must do. And if I have any fellow lawyers in the room, the law is grounded in ethics. And some of these ethical issues we're concerned about are codified. Some aren't. Some of them, like privacy issues and data privacy, as I talked about, it's actually been codified in many places around the world. Other ethics issues like transparency and others, it's not codified, which means it puts pressure back on you. And so these first two layers of non-AI laws, what's an example of a non-AI law that's impacting AI systems? Well, I gave you one already, GDPR, the data privacy laws, but also equally or more important, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the US stands for you can't bias and discriminate. And so if your AI systems are biased and if they're discriminatory, you'll be violating the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It's not an AI bill, obviously, but it directly applies to AI systems. Level 2 is smaller because we don't have a lot of AI laws today. This next level is interesting. We found in our research there's a wide swath of things that companies can do that are not only good for the world, but they're good for business. You can produce an ROI. You can return an investment on many ethical actions. It's good for your reputation. It's good for your customer relations. And we call that conscious capitalism. It's good for the world, good for business. Why wouldn't you do it? We say you should do that because it's good for everybody. And there's actually quite a few examples. We had so many companies said to me, okay, I get levels 1 through 3. It's good for my business, I understand, and that's helpful, but what if we want to go further? What if we want, what are some things that we could do that are just good for the planet? Even if we can't get a return from my business, we call that ethical elevation. And we designed some steps here because we heard from many companies. I was heartened by that. They said, yeah, I want to know what can we do that could be good for the planet. We showed this to the lead ethicist at Harvard. He said, okay, I think that's good. This can help people, but you're missing something. And you're missing the fact that many places, these fundamental human rights are not codified in all corners of the world. So don't forget impact on fundamental human rights like privacy, as an example. Don't forget that it should run throughout all of this. Okay, so to bring this to life and to get some examples, and we'll make these available for you, and we won't go through the bottom 2 layers is complying with laws that are in practice today. But look at on the right side, and what this is those same 4 layers on the y-axis. And in the columns are, I would argue that no matter what a company is doing with an AI program, it fits into one of those 3 columns. It's either about how do you govern, or internal process stuff, or external customer-facing stuff. Probably oversimplified, but if you can just work with me on it. Look at the level 3 in the products column. I think this is an example of, I think this is an ethical principle that there should be transparency. If you're using the hand of AI, if you're leveraging the hand of AI in a product that's impacting your customer, I believe there's an ethical obligation to tell your customer that you're doing that. Very few countries have laws that say you have to do that. But that's still, I believe, it's an ethical obligation. I think it's good for business, it's good for your relations. I think you should do it, but it's not codified. And so that's why ethics really matters. An example of the top, I've got examples of 2 companies that are doing this, the top in the middle. They've decided to have a third-party assessment of how their AI impacts the world. And they're going to publish the results no matter what they are. That's pretty powerful. Some companies are doing it. Some of them the results weren't great. And so I've been on record as if we were doctors, we're not doctors. If we were doctors, we'd be talking about the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm in the world, right? First, do no harm to your patients. I think we need a Hippocratic Oath for AI. First, don't mess up the planet with your AI systems. And we don't really have that today. This is still very much a developing area. One of the areas that this is hot off the press, this is very much in process. We're working with a lot of companies to help them determine something we stole this from bioethics. Many bioethics in the research showed that organizations would really thoughtfully determine what are the boundaries of what we will tolerate on an ethics issue. Let me say that again. What are the boundaries of what we will tolerate on an ethics issue? And so we got really interested in this, and the y-axis is just risk, low to high, and the x-axis is these responsible AI principles I'm talking about. You've got to have humans involved, and transparency and privacy. We've talked about some of those. Well, important for institutions to come together and figure out how much privacy are we going to demand out of our developers? How much transparency do we want within our AI systems? And we're seeing there's a big gap in the world. We're helping organizations come to this point to determine what will we tolerate as an institution. I shared with a few earlier another quick story. I was meeting with a board of a big retailer and a director who happened to be in his early 80s. I got a minute into a presentation on this stuff, and the director heard ethics and did a lot of preparation and said, "Can you just stop, please?" to me and said, "Can you just tell us which ethicist should we follow? Just tell us. Should we follow John Stuart Mills? Should we follow Aristotle? Just tell us what to do." And it was such an interesting question. I wasn't thinking that question was coming, and really thought about it and said, that's not the question you should be asking. The question you should be asking is, what does it mean to us as a leadership team? What do we want to stand for as an institution? What will we tolerate? That's a more important question than which philosopher you'll follow. Because, by the way, if you're a multinational company, it is impossible to have a global code of ethics. Why is that? It's impossible to have a global code of ethics. Ethics is very local, it's community driven. Eastern ethics is very different from Western ethics. And so another layer of complexity. Okay, as we're coming to a close, the last point I want to make, and this, we'll get this around to folks. We've been publishing essays and op-eds on the stuff I talk about today. We can get links to that to you if you're interested. I want to end with this. The question I would get all the time is, am I optimistic about AI? Get that a lot. My glass is half full. I'm an optimist. I get the question a lot, like, are you optimistic about AI? And I struggled with the answer because of some of the risks that we talked about today, some of the existential risk and some of the more mundane risks that are still important. I really struggled with the question. I didn't know how to answer it until I saw this quote from Charlie Parker, famous jazz musician, obviously in a very different context. Somebody asked him the question if he was optimistic about something. This was how he answered. I'm an optimist, but an optimist who carries a raincoat. So what does that mean? That's how I feel about AI. I'm optimistic, but don't forget about the risks that are involved. And I ask you to take that away from my talk today. It's powerful. Your careers will be defined in many ways, I think, by the capabilities of AI. But remember the discussion about the risks, because I don't believe that they're universally felt. And so my advice to you and how I feel is to be optimistic, but think about those risks and carry a raincoat. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know me, you might be better off, but I am Jim Mustick, Senior Advisor to the President. We're going to have a little Q&A with Mr. Saviano. Thank you for that talk. But first I have a question and maybe a small homework assignment, optional, for the students. How many of you knew or know who Charlie Parker was? Show of hands. Very good, just as I thought.
David
Well,
Bowie's.
Here's the optional assignment. Go to ChatGPT or whatever AI system you use, type in who was Charlie Parker. And then go to Spotify or whatever your streaming service of choice is and find a song called Coco, K-O-K-O by Charlie Parker, and listen to that. And compare the output from the AI with listening to the music, and just think about the difference there between information and experience and between machine outputs and human expressiveness. Those are themes that we'll be talking about a lot in the speaker series as we go forward. So Coco, K-O-K-O, Charlie Parker.
I think that's the best advice anybody said today, Jim. That's pretty good. That's really good. I love it.
I'm going to ask you one question, and then we'll
Yeah.
open it up for questions from the floor. You graduated with an accounting degree from Iona in 1989. I know you are a smart man,
Please.
but there's no way you could have predicted your career trajectory from that degree in 1989. So could you tell us a little bit about how you got from accounting to law to AI and ethics and all of that? Because it's quite a trajectory, and I think it'll be instructive to students that you are all thinking, or your parents are thinking, or somebody's thinking, that you're going to graduate from here from a job, get a job, and that's it. And I think it's important that the technology is going to be evolving. Part of what you need to learn while you're here is how to evolve with it. So Jeff, if you talk about that a little bit, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I think there's always lots of twists and turns and things I never would have imagined as I was racing across campus. Now I remember the paper was late. I remember it now, but never would have imagined. And I knew there was something about accounting, but then tax. I loved my tax classes, and I went right to law school. And it's really got right away. I had a tax career and was a tax lawyer for many years, and that led me to. I had a boss who was really innovative, who said, "Take 10% of your job," and this was before anybody had innovation roles. This was like 15 years ago, and said, "We realized one day that about 15% of everything we did became obsolete within a year." And so we realized, and she realized, that we have to be more programmatic about it. So take 10% of your time, and that led to 30, 50%, and we built labs. That led us to MIT. We started to develop new products and solutions. That got me involved in AI and ethics, and everything really changed. I caught the bug for innovation. I was really lucky. We brought in a team that was trained under famed professor at Harvard, Clayton Christensen, who was the godfather of disruptive innovation. And they thought it was quirky that this team of tax people wanted to innovate. and we fell into it and got really lucky to learn from the best in the world.
Most people who try to innovate in the tax system end up in jail. So I'm
They
glad
do.
you.
They do. That's right. I always have to remind people. There's good innovation. All the tax innovation is, which line should the expense be on, not whether it should be on one.
Some questions from the audience. Anybody have any questions for Jeff?
What a great question. Be careful whoever follows this question, because that's a good one. And it really gets I appreciate it. I appreciate your question. That I mentioned it once, but there's a notion of a human in the loop, and one of the ethics issues that we're very mindful of is not to over automate. And I think that there's a risk of many companies and organizations they're not using AI to its fullest extent. There's also a risk of over automating, and by over automation meaning there's a lot of overzealous leaders who want to take people out of the equation. Who needs people anymore when you have these machines? And I think the risk that you're talking about from your great question, that much of it is triggered by an over automation. And so it's an issue that the community is getting more focused on to ensure that, how we started today's talk, that, the essence of us as humans, the judgment and empathy and the essence of humanity of what we need to bring to these AI systems. And I hope, and we talked to the military about this in particular, and they are on it to ensure that you've got people involved and can have the ability to turn it off if it's proposing something that you don't appreciate the outcome. Good question.
Another question?
So you spoke a lot on the business and government side of AI and things like that, but to speak more on the educational side of things, as a student, I've heard many times from professors either to use AI sparingly or to not use it at all. Do you believe that there are risks as a student moving forward through education, or do you believe that as a student we should be learning with AI moving forward?
Oh yeah, great. That's an elephant in the room. Thank you for getting the elephant in the room. There's I wish I had it with me. There's a great picture from the mid 70s of college professors on the picket line. They're protesting. They actually have pickets. They're protesting. Can you imagine you're protesting horrible situation of allowing calculators in the classroom? And it was interesting. It's been surfacing, and I think there's also there's a great book written by author Anne Lamott, who wrote a book on writing called Bird by Bird. I love it, and she's got one chapter. I'll change the first word. One chapter is called "Crappy First Drafts," and the benefit of that. And I think that's one of the areas I talk about is that, and I teach this in law school class. I teach that don't lose that ability, and the learning from putting pen to paper on first draft is so beneficial. There's so many great tools, and using generative AI to check for grammar and sentence structure and ideas and theorizing is great, but there's something about creating first drafts that I would really implore you not to succumb to just relying upon these tools. Not that you're going to get caught but it's like if you want to become a great writer, you need to produce crappy first drafts. And that's what I worry about the most. I worry, and that's a wonderful book. The title of the book was derived from her brother was in grammar school and had a book report due on birds, and he procrastinated all summer, didn't do it, and then day before it was due, he broke down crying, and his father came over and said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I have a report due tomorrow on birds. I don't know where to start." And the father put his arm around him and said, "Son, you just need to go bird by bird." And I think there's a lot of value in that. It's that to me is about the struggle. It's the struggle of the writing and going bird by bird. There's a lot of value in that, and I wouldn't want you to lose that. Bird by bird. Good question.
Back there.
Hi. So with AI in the room, do you think professionals in the business suit will be more inclined to rely on tech to decide whether to use AI or not and how? Or do you think that will continue to lie into the business decision and not with the tech team? Like, how do you see that rolling out in the future?
So how do we see, if I understood the question, how do we see AI influencing decision making? And will it influence?
And will it be in the business side of the business, or will it be more on the tech team to decide?
Oh, I see. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's a really good question. It's across the board there are some really forward-looking companies whose business leaders are looking for an edge. Everybody's looking for an edge in their strategy and growth, and they realize that through these advanced analytics, and they were doing this before generative AI. We had AI-driven prediction models, and it was starting to produce a lot of value. It's a good question because oftentimes it'll start with the tech people, but business leaders who are strategic and want to find that edge will experiment with it, and typically finds that, again, like back to the great first question that we got, don't just rely upon the results of the prediction system, but take it, and there's a great term that some of the scientists at MIT use that I love, collective intelligence. And I love it because I think it gets to the essence of we're better together. It's not about, as knowledge workers, you're going to be replaced by an AI system. You're much more likely to be replaced by somebody else who's enabled by AI that you've been slow to use. That's more likely to happen. So I think that answer your question that way, that everybody's looking for an edge, and that's one edge that some are finding.
One question kind of provoked by the three that we just heard. You've talking at the enterprise level of businesses deploying AI to drive their businesses. But for students, and many of us not involved in enterprise level work,
Yeah.
the AI is coming to us as products from companies trying to get a return on their investment. And it seems to me that there's a danger of the productization of the AI defining for us what it can do, whereas actually the capabilities of the systems can be far greater than what OpenAI tells us they are or anybody else. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest areas, and it's hard for companies that we call that third-party risk management of you're using somebody else's system, and we're starting to see that there's some, from the business perspective, companies, if you're a retailer and you're relying upon another company's AI system, all of a sudden the lawyers are demanding things like, I want a right to audit that. So as business to business, they can do that. But for us, I think the essence of your question, Jim, as consumers, it's really hard. I think we are starting to find, though, that there are some reputable third-party independent reviewers of technology that will sort of gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down to tech, and there are some that have already been sort of weaned out because either the practices were less than ethical or the products really weren't that robust. And it's hard. It's a really good question, but I think I'd search for, give an example for lawyers. There's an organization called Legal Tech Hub, and it's a nonprofit that has evaluated hundreds of AI tools for lawyers. And if you're a law firm, you're a solo practitioner, you can't do that. You can't, and so we're starting to see on a sector by sector basis, there are organizations like that one that will actually vet hundreds of them, and they'll give you like a Yelp review for it and say, I think this is 7 out of 10, or this is 1 out of 10, I'd go someplace else. It's hard.
One of the things we talked about when we grabbed a sandwich before this was that, and it's related to what you were saying, the interesting thing about this technology is that the primary programming language is English.
Yes.
Any of us can interact with it and develop programs, get answers, and so on, which actually gives all of us as teachers or as students great capabilities that we might not have had before. And that's kind of something that's fundamentally different about generative AI,
Yeah.
particularly in the space of education than before.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a great a joke around that. What was the hottest programming language of 2023? Was it C++? Was it COBOL? It wasn't. It was English, because that's how you use these systems. And that's so exciting. That's the ubiquity of technology of these systems, and that it's so accessible. It's open source. If a company had an AI team 5 years ago, it was probably in the basement, and it was probably like 5 people. But it's different now. It's different that it's become something that everybody can use. And so, but there's risks in that. And one of the risks, and I didn't really talk about this as much, but and you're using it. That exchange that you have with the generative AI tool. And I teach a class at Boston University School of Law, and I was imploring to the students one day, just a month ago, saying that you just don't forget, if you put confidential information in, you could blow attorney-client privilege and IP protection, and how could people be so crazy to do that? And a few of the students stopped me in my tracks and said, but I don't think you understand, like, that when you use this, it's like I'm talking to my sister. And so it was designed that way. And don't blame us. It was the developers that did it purposefully. And it's easy to forget that you're not talking to a friend, but instead you're actually divulging confidential information. And I think they were right to sort of put me in my place. I think that it's a fair point. These systems were designed that way.
Do I get to ask a question?
Yes, you do.
Well, let me start by, Jeff, by thanking you for coming, because this was wonderful.
you.
But I do have kind of a practical question. You referred to the fact that we shouldn't necessarily be worried about being replaced by machines, but maybe we should be worried about being replaced by somebody who knows how to use those machines or the technology. How does that change the skill sets that our students need to have upon their graduation from Iona?
Yeah, great question. I think, Dean DeMellis, that applies to you, assuming, well, knowledge workers. And if you have a desire, or if you have your kid wants to be a long distance truck driver, there's a chance that you could be replaced by a machine. But so the point was for knowledge workers. I think that's unlikely. What's exciting about it is that if you look at what it's replacing are certain aspects and capabilities and tasks that you would do. If you put that on a spectrum, there's like a bottom 20% of stuff we all do that's monotonous and it's drudgery. Some of the data points of how much time we waste, it's incredible to me. In some professions, you waste like a third of your work is trying to find something. Okay, like a third of your time is just trying to find stuff. It's unbelievable to me when I see that data, how much we as knowledge workers waste time just trying to find things. One of the tools that came out of the legal tech stack is around a concept called e-discovery. What e-discovery is, if companies get sued, they have to respond by providing documents. They may have to parse through 20,000 documents and determine what's discoverable and what's not. What we're learning is that, and they've built generative AI tools into that, we're taking those tools and we're porting them into knowledge worker just to be able to find stuff, find knowledge. And we're getting like incredible results of being able to so it's a simple example of one of the early places of exploration is that like just that alone, can you imagine that? If the time that you, and whatever your percentage is, okay, just think in your head, like what percentage of your time do you spend trying to find things? Cut that in half and just think what an impact that will make. The technology is there to do that, but it hasn't quite been at scale yet, but that's coming really fast.
Jeff, thank you very much. We have full room here. There's an overflow
Oh, I
audience,
can't even imagine.
which I'm afraid
Slow night on
means
campus?
that the cookies you were supposed to get after this are probably all gone
Oh,
to
my
that
gosh.
overflow audience.
You
But we'll
promised
see
me.
when we go out there.
You promised that.
Anyway, thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
time.
What a joy. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.